Well, hello everybody, and welcome to our presentation today. I guess it behooves me to tell everybody that this is being recorded. I say that in a good way because essentially what it means is that we are going to put it up on the YouTube website, and that will happen later on this evening. Today will actually be the last Tuesday webinar that we do prior to the Thanksgiving week, which is next week. So we will not have any webinars next week, but we will come back very strong on Tuesday the following week, and I'm going to show you why in just a second. But as far as we're concerned today, get rid of some ambient noise there. We are at the Greater San Diego Association of Realtors, and my name is Kevin Burke, and there is my telephone number, and there is my email address. I would just as soon speak with you in person. Let me log in over here. There we go. Okay, so I would just as soon speak with you in person, but if you can't get a hold of me, then certainly please send me an email. And then if I don't respond to you within 10 minutes, then send me another email. I do want to hear from you, and I do want to speak and help you as best that I can. So again, I do that out of appreciation for you attending my webinar. So that being said, I have some credentials, I guess, that make me qualified to speak about the subject matter today. I have a broker's license in several states. I've been in real estate since 1979, so I put in 40 plus years, so I didn't have to go back and keep changing all my templates here. So, but it's a long time. Most people, I tell everybody, it's not that I know more than anybody else; it's just that I've outlived everybody else. So, and as I started to say earlier, this is being recorded. However, those people viewing the webinar cannot see you. They can only see me. And in fact, on that note, they cannot see the questions that you ask in the Q&A line. And I'll talk about that again in a second. But as you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, I do teach continuing education for attorneys. I have been doing that for close to 25 years now at UCSD, working there as an adjunct professor. On the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, also down towards the bottom, you can see I taught legal aspects of real estate at the college level, and that was well over 15 years of doing that happiness, most of that simultaneously. And then on the right-hand side, you can see that last year I was chair of Risk Management Issues West for the National Association of Realtors, as well as being chair of Realtor Risk Management and Consumer Protection for the California Association of Realtors. And next year, I will be chair of the Legal Affairs Forum. So I'm very excited about the opportunity to continue my goal of risk management at all levels of real estate expertise. So we're going to be talking about subjects that are going to appear to be legal. I want it clear, I am not a practicing attorney. I have no interest whatsoever in that. I think we don't work as hard as they do. We make more money than they do. And so I'm very happy doing what it is that I do. So that being said, my trial work, and I do an extensive amount of trial work, is limited to testifying as an expert witness, standard of care, agents' duties of inspection and disclosure, market conditions in San Diego County. So those are my expertise. And then the standard of care issue, of course, did the agent do what they were supposed to do? Did they follow best practices? Things like that. Okay, so kind of an important subject. All right, so our conversation today is not intended to be a substitute for the advice of your broker, nor for that of your attorney. Please consult with them as appropriate. It's very important that you get advice from the people that you've employed. You've employed them. I always tell people it's not what you think. You think they employed you. No. You employed them. I mean, they have a vested interest in making sure that you are doing okay. So very important concept. Hi, Ed. Our webinars are intended to be interactive. Please utilize the Q&A button to ask questions or offer input. I very much look forward to hearing from you because it helps me to shape the direction that we travel when we talk about the subject matter. So that being said, we've had some interesting webinars. No one of them is like another. I've got a couple of top 10 risk management webinars loaded up onto the YouTube website. And if you were to watch them, you would see there's varying content in each one. So that being said, today is Thursday, and we are going to talk first about the top 10 risk avoidance techniques, formerly known as lawsuit avoidance. I've had the privilege of being as close as I am to the legal community, and yet not been a party to a lawsuit. And so I'm in a lot of lawsuits, but none that were my own. And then this afternoon, we're going to talk about changes to the RPA. And I'm also going to show you some of the new forms that are coming out. And so if you're like me and you like going to the CAR website and pulling it up, and so let me go to that just really quick here. I want to show you what I'm talking about. So I go over here to the CAR's standard website. I click on Transaction Center. I look at standard forms, and then down here I see forms revisions and new form releases. I pull that up and I see, as I have seen for a couple of weeks now, ever since the Burnett decision came down, that the December 23 quick summary has been taken off of their website. And that is because, of course, as a result of the surprise decision, they are certainly out there right now trying to update the forms and make sure that they are in compliance. They don't want to leave some up there and then kind of piecemeal it back together again, because there would be no way of you knowing when they actually did that. So they just took them all down. Now, I happen to have the forms as they were written prior to them actually taking them off the website. So I'll talk a little bit about that this afternoon as well, plus some significant changes. For 2023, the December release at the moment doesn't have anything in the RPA about it, but I suspect we might be touching on that seller's payment of brokers, buyer broker compensation form. So anyway, we'll talk a little bit about that today. So Tuesday now, so we're going to skip next week again, because next week is Thanksgiving week. And so we're going to give thanks and do all that. A lot of us are traveling. So we are going to skip next week. But when we return on Tuesday, I'm going to be talking about the new buyer representation broker compensation agreement. And then in the afternoon, I will be talking about open house success. I've got a pretty good track record of making a lot of money off open houses. I'm hoping that I can help you as well to be successful in your endeavor. I think, the only advantage we have is time, and I have the same 24 hours in a day that you do. And so, what I do with my 24 hours may be a little bit different, and maybe that's a good thing. Okay, so that being said, member benefits, which is our subject matter for today. Thank you for joining us. Top 10 risk avoidance techniques. Again, risk avoidance because we were calling it lawsuit avoidance, and I guess they kind of wanted to tone it down just a little bit. And as I said earlier, we're going to load the webinar up into the YouTube platform, and I'll give you the address for that a little bit later on, as well as if you have a QR code reader, you can just take a picture of it and it'll take you right there. So that being said, that's where we're putting everything, and I can tell you that I'm starting into the foray of podcasts, and I will be addressing the buyer representation agreement by paragraph on the podcast. So the webinars are free. Podcasts, we're probably going to have to put a firewall up there, only because I know that plaintiff's counsel loves to go to look to see what it is that I'm doing. And so not that I have anything to hide, because I say the same thing on the podcast or on the webinar that I say at trial. So, and same thing at deposition. There's never a surprise. Okay, that being said, who are we afraid of? And I always say, we when we get into real estate, I don't know if you can hear me okay. Let me pull this over here. When we get into real estate, we all have these little things about ourselves that we're worried about what other people can actually hear. I'm trying to turn that up. There we go. What other people are looking at us. And so when I say who are we afraid of, I say, well, we're afraid of the lawyers. I think a lot of people are afraid of the lawyers. I'm not. I think they're just trying to put shoes on their kids' feet too. But we seem to be afraid of the lawyers, and then we seem to be afraid of the California Department of Real Estate. And so I don't understand that at all. I love the California Department of Real Estate. I mean, it's a regulatory agency like any any other. Their job is to level the playing field, to make sure that the consumer is well represented, the consumer is not taken advantage of, and things like that. And they set processes in motion to enforce those things. And we're going to talk about some of those things here today. But my advice for my non-legal advice for all of us is, I make some pretty good money in trial, but I'm going to tell you there's no money in it for us. So, for us as an industry, it's just not a good place to go. We never know what the outcome is going to be, much like the Burnett case. We never know what the outcome is going to look like. So I'm probably getting more calls on that than anything else. People asking me, what is my opinion? I had an attorney call me yesterday morning, and he says, "What do you think about that case?" And I went, "Well, I can't really give you legal advice, counselor, but I kind of think they've already filed for the appeal. It's going to be years before we're going to get there." And so, I'm telling everybody, business as usual, keep doing what you're doing. Buyer representation agreement, very clearly be clear with the buyer and with the seller where the commissions are going. And I think you'll be okay. In California, we had a lot of the things were taken care of that were addressed in the Burnett decision. But we already had the buyer representation agreement. It was just a question of getting people to use it and getting people to understand it. And so June Barlow, the attorney for CAR, said in a meeting the other day that if we have to legislate it, we can do it. We can do it fairly quickly. I think personally it should be. There were 13 states that came back and said we're just not affected by the Burnett decision because we've legislated buyer representation agreements. So in Virginia, where I have a broker's license and I teach there for the DPOR, which is the equivalent of the DRE, they made it a law on July 1st of last year. So when the verdict came down, they just kind of felt like they'd sidestepped the whole thing. So that being said, that's kind of where we are on that. Why are we afraid of who we're afraid of? Why? Because lawyers cost us money? Yeah, they can be expensive, right? And they're working, they're pedaling as fast as they can. And so, a lot of times, we want instant answers and we don't always get them. And so we kind of think that maybe they're up to something. I'm not sure if I agree with that so much. The DRE has said that they can make more money off of enforcement than licensing. So that's something we should be afraid of. And so Wayne Bell, who is certainly one of my favorite commissioners I've had, I've been friends with all of them, but the Wayne Bell made a comment in a meeting I was in with him, and he stood up there in front of everybody. He said, "We've realized we can make more money off of enforcement than we are off of licensing itself." So literally the dues that we pay, the monies that we pay would not be enough to really keep the boat afloat. It's the citations and the enforcement penalties and things like that the Department of Real Estate does. And I thought that was a very interesting, honest comment to make. And they do it every day. They have a thing called a cite and fine. Cite and fine says they send you a letter. I had a broker call me, and the broker says, I got a letter from the Department of Real Estate, says send us a check for $10,000. And I said, "Oh, wow." And the broker said, "What should I do?" And I said, "I'd probably send them a check for $10,000. Is it a shakedown? Is it extortion? I don't know. I just know that apparently one of their agents had been doing something that was a violation of the department's policy. Actually had to do with open house signs that didn't identify the license status or the company or have the DRE number or any of those things on it. And so and somebody, a competitor turned the person in. And so the one thing to remember with the Department of Real Estate, and that is that the regulations, the law says that if they investigate you, you have to pay the cost of the investigation. So that's why you see most times people plead out. They just say, "Okay, fine, I get it. How much do I give you?" The other thing to remember is that, and this was another comment made by Mr. Bell, who, by the way, was an attorney, and he was the head of enforcement for the DRE before he became the commissioner, and he was that for over 20 years. But he, I'm going to lose my train of thought. What did he say? He made a comment about Well, I'll talk a little bit more about him in just a second. We'll get to that. So the solution. So what's our solution? Well, let's take a look. So the first thing we always talk about is stay within your boundaries. And so, it's really, really important to us that first of all, we know what our boundaries are. What are we held liable for? And so, we are held to a standard. And I'm going to pull that up here in a second. So your standard of care is that education required to get your real estate license. Well, then what are we doing when we're opining on or we're disagreeing with a physical inspector or others who have insurance for their actions as well? That education required to get your license, and that was Wayne Bell that said that. Okay, and so I want to pull up his comment. I'm going to show this to you, and as always, all the stuff that I pull up for you is fair game. You send me an email, say please send me everything, and I'll send it all to you. So this was back when it was the BRE, and there's a long political reason for why they changed the name and then changed it back again. But this is the professional movement. It makes the real estate practitioner a professional, again, by the commissioner at the time, Wayne Bell. And I'm going to go down here to page 4 because that's where the action item is. And on page 4, he says up here at the top, my conclusion is that professionalism in performing real estate license services requires licensees to have the knowledge, skills, and abilities gained through education and or practice and experience and thoroughness and preparation, including organization and diligence, to well and ethically represent their clients. Now, I know there's a lot of really big words in there, but essentially, you get educated, and then you have your experience in the business and your practice in the business, and then that you should, that's what you should stay in that, right? So I had a lawsuit, not that we're going to talk about a bunch of lawsuits that I've been involved in, but I had a lawsuit where the real estate agent was the buyer's agent was with the buyer outside the property. It was a harborfront property. It had a slip in it, a slip in the front that, where they put the boats and stuff like that. Well, so they were out there one day. It was low tide. The buyer, by the way, had elected not to get a physical inspection by a licensed contractor, which, as we know by law, they really have to do that. It's their obligation and their duty. But the buyer says to the buyer's agent, how does the stem wall look to you? Now, mind you, I didn't have a clue what a stem wall was myself, right? And the buyer's agent didn't know either. And yet the buyer's agent had been selling, harborfront properties and things like that. And so it was low tide. So he saw concrete down there and he goes, stem wall looks okay to me. And so millions of dollars in attorney's fees later, because the buyer sued, because the agent had said that the stem wall looked okay to them, but it turns out there's this little thing. I know more about stem walls today than I ever thought I'd ever care to know. There are these little eels that get into the concrete and they eat the concrete away and stuff like that. And so this place was ripe with them. I mean, they hired divers. They had all kinds of stuff going on in this lawsuit. And it's like, okay, I probably, why did I give the opinion that the stem wall was okay? When I didn't know what the stem wall was, because he just figured it was low tide, that must be the wall because the buyer pointed at it. So you don't want to look stupid. Sometimes it's okay to look stupid, folks. And I want to tell you the secret is, when somebody asks you a question, if you don't know the answer to it, try not to know all things. Try to learn new things every day. And so I have situations with brokers who they just know everything, and so they're just the most difficult to train, and they're the ones that are in the most trouble. And so learn something new every day. And so what the response should have been to the buyer, it should have been, that's a really good question. You should write this down. That's a really good question. Let me find out and I'll get back to you. So there's no I don't know in there, but you compliment it first. You say, that's a really good question. Let me find out. So I will find the source, right? Because we never want to be the source. We want to be the source of the source, not the source, right? So I'm going to put that up in print in a minute. You're going to see that. So the buyer's agent's answer should have been, that's a really good question. I don't know. I'm sorry, not I don't know. That's a really good question. Let me find out and I'll get back to you. And then get back to them. Okay. It's important that you do that. And so don't shine them on. I've got situations right now that are going to escalate to lawsuit because the agent is not responding to the client. And part of that goes back to, I just plain know everything. And so, listen, I've been doing this a long time. I probably know more than a lot of people. Like I said earlier, I've just outlived everybody. But at the end of the day, I don't make comments about stuff that are outside of my field of expertise. So I want to just make sure that I'm clear about that. And that was what Wayne Bell said. He said, that your standard of care is that education required to get your license. Okay. And so I don't remember, and I teach all the classes to get your license. I teach continuing education. I teach the purchase agreement, DRE approved class, 5 hours of continuing education credit. You will know the RPA better than anybody if you attend that class. And then I teach the buyer representation agreement for 3 hours of credit with the Department of Real Estate. But out of all of that, all the stuff that I have done, I don't remember a single class. I can't even think of what category to put it in where we learned about stem walls on harborfront properties. Does that make sense? Stay away from that stuff. If you don't know the answer and you're just not comfortable saying, I don't know, I say, I don't know all the time. I had an agent who, every time I would say, I don't know, he would break up his phone and say, can you say that again? I want to copy that. And so, so that I can say that I heard you say it. So it's like, no, I say it all the time. I'm fine not knowing everything. I'm okay not knowing everything. Okay, everybody good with that? So stay within your boundaries. Do not make representations that are outside of your field of expertise. That's one of the most important things that I can teach you. Okay, so number 2, remember to whom you owe your fiduciary duty. So fiduciary duty, what is that? That means that it's and again, they use the term to define itself, and this is in Civil Code 2079. So you'll find this on your agency disclosure form, because that's 2079, the AD form is in 2079. All we did as CAR is take a picture of it, put it on our letterhead, and make everybody sign it. Okay, so fiduciary duty of utmost care, integrity, honesty, and loyalty in the dealings with either the seller or the buyer. Okay, so we're going to talk about a couple scenarios of, were you following the fiduciary duty? So what is that fiduciary duty? So, and again, I don't think this is a good definition, but this happens to be the one that's in the form. But the bottom line is that you put your client's interest above your own. Okay, and so how do we do that? Well, let's find out. I'm representing a seller. I'm on the seller side. So am I doing it right when I have a pocket listing? Think about it for a second. You have a pocket listing. So what does that mean? In the old days, when I first got started in real estate, my hair was a whole different color then. When I first got started in real estate, a pocket listing meant I know someone who's thinking about selling their property. I don't have a listing agreement. But today it's kind of fast forwarded to pocket listing means I have a listing agreement, but I'm not going to put it in the MLS because, I just love the concept of getting paid twice as much. I get along great with the other agents. I get to have dinner with them, the whole thing. I'm talking about myself. So on a pocket listing, there's a lot of advantages to me for the pocket listing, right? But what are those advantages? How do those translate to the seller of the property? And Gov Hutchinson, and it was really great when I was chair of risk management last year. Gov Hutchinson was my left-hand guy. He sat right next to me. I would get up there and talk, and he gets up at one point and he says, it brings me a great deal of comfort to know that the chair of this committee has probably more legal experience than anyone in the room. And I just thought it was the nicest thing for him to say, because I always defer to others. Okay, but he said in another meeting, a presentation he did for San Diego, new laws presentation, when we were talking about these issues of pocket listings, and he said the fact that you want to double end the transaction is not a defense to the act of doing it. And so, did you represent the seller in the highest possible light? So were you able to get the seller the most amount of money that you could possibly get for the seller? That's the goal, right? A lot of times the sellers don't understand. They get a little confused and they think that, I don't want my neighbors to know the house is on the market. Well, the second it goes in the MLS, they're going to know. the second the word gets out, they're going to know. So that's why we have like clear cooperation today, you know, things like that that are trying to make it so that you actually do that. So why the pocket listing? Why is that a problem? Well, there's a number of issues. The FBI and the Department of Real Estate say we think it's steering. We think that you are steering people into the neighborhood. You are building the composition of the neighborhood, and that's why pocket listings. And they watch the 0-day market times. You know, we used to put in sold before processing. Things like that. In our office, we don't even, you know, we have situations where we have potential dual agency. But we have a couple of attorneys that are in our office who just will not be dual agents because, you know, in the legal profession, that's what we learned. We learned that how can you possibly represent both sides fairly and not favor one over another? So in their situation, they tend to be the listing agent or the seller's agent, and then we make accommodations to have somebody else represent the buyer on that transaction. So be aware, pocket listings problematic at best, and I get it; it's very tempting, and maybe you're only doing a deal a year, and maybe that's okay. But check with your broker. You know, in our office, we don't do them. We don't do pocket listings. In fact, we go further. We don't even do we don't even do dual agency without going through a bunch of hoops for that. So excuse me a second here. I just want to make sure I've turned this phone off. Yes. Okay. Okay. All right. So invariably, Linda's agents call me when I'm in the middle of a webinar, one that they should be watching. So anyway, so that's my pocket listing. Fair housing issues. Okay, so we talked about that. And so did I pull that one up? Let me check, because I think I actually pulled up the fair housing. Let me see here. Go. Let's shut Wayne down just for a second. I did pull up a whole bunch of stuff, but did I pull up fair housing? I have a lot of stuff to show you. Buyer's guide, non-contingent offers, substituted disclosures. No, I guess I didn't pull it up. Darn it all. There's a really good, let me see here if I can grab it really fast. Fair housing laws. Again, some of this stuff is really good stuff. So let me capture that for you so you can see it. So the Fair Housing Guide, so equal access to housing for all, a very well written Q&A. We have 22 protected classes in California. We finally have military status as a protected class. Virginia's had it for quite some time, but Virginia also differs from California in that elderliness is a protected class, you know, something that is certainly very appealing to me. So best practices to avoid them, penalties, it can get really ugly, folks. So you know, you really don't want to go afoul of this. So again, if you want copies of all this stuff, I'm more than happy to send it to you. But fair housing issues, big deal. And you run that risk when you're doing a pocket listing. And so again, we talked a little bit about dual agency already. Dual agency, of course, being you know, whenever it's not just I'm representing the seller and the buyer. It's when the seller and the buyer are represented by the same agent. And I say agent because that's my specialty, right? My standard of care specialty says, you know, agency law. So agency with an uppercase A. So whoever your broker is, that is the agent. In all of the licensees that work under that broker create the potential for dual agency in a real estate transaction. So we've had some really interesting cases. There was a case up in North County where the seller listed their property with a brokerage. And then they listed it, I'm going to throw numbers out, $720,000 for a house. I know you can't get a house. I mean, that's a nice car nowadays, but they listed the property for $720,000. And then a couple of weeks later, a property across the street gets listed, same property, model match, $480,000. So $140,000. Is that right? Did I do the math right there? $240,000 difference in price by a real estate agent from way out in Chula Vista under the same agent, uppercase A. You follow what I'm saying? So big franchise, big brokerage. And so now we had two agents underneath the same broker. And then that's what's going to create your dual agency. And so that case actually, the seller sues, by the way, because you diminished the value of my property by listing my competition for less money. And I can tell you in my circles in the legal field, we're all scratching our head going, okay, that makes sense. And that was the genesis of the PRBS form, which is the form that you get signed by the client early on in the transaction that authorizes you to be a dual agent in that transaction. Does that make sense for everybody? So dual agency, very dangerous, can create all kinds of problems. If anybody knows the difference, it's probably going to be me. And like I said, we just have a policy in our office of taking care of it so that it doesn't become an issue. So what about my buyer side now? I want to talk about the buyer side for a minute. So on the buyer side, what about writing multiple offers on multiple properties? Now, I'm sure you've probably seen this happen. We had one recently where the agent actually said to us, I'm writing an offer on 5 properties. And so our question, of course, is always, can your buyer buy all 5? And the answer is no, but I can get them out of the transaction for any reason. And I'm like, please don't ever say that, folks, because when you say things like that, that means that you are okay committing a tort, which is called interference with contract. And that's where you've told the client that the agreement, the contract, is illusory. And that's a term of law that says that it really isn't real. I mean, because I can get you out of it for any reason. So that's one of those things people have to understand. When they have a contract, they have a contract. And so I had this happen with a broker. I was management with the Red people, and broker says buyer want, the other broker on the other side of the transaction says buyer wants to exit the transaction. So I said, okay, why? And they said, well, I don't have to tell you. And so my response was, well, why don't you have to tell me? And they said, well, because I can get the buyer out of the transaction for any reason for 17 days. Now that's a very old way of thinking that said, and this is what they did. They figured, okay, they refer to it as a 17-day free peak, things like that, terms that really going to get us in trouble. Okay. So I said, that's not going to work. And so then, we proceeded forward, and he keeps trying to get out of the deal. And, I don't have an obligation to educate him, especially not in a real estate transaction. Now we're probably giving legal advice, so I'm not going to do that. And so he did not understand the concept of why do I have to have a reason to get out of the transaction? And so he ultimately figured it out, and he figured out that the it requires a material fact affecting the value and desirability of the property. So all he had to do was find the material fact. I didn't have to tell him that. So back to my multiple offers, I'm writing offers. So how do you get around that, writing multiple offers? Your client's frustrated. They're trying to buy a house. They can't get their offer accepted, that kind of thing. And they want to write a whole bunch of offers at one time. Well, the easiest way to do that, I think, and still be legitimate is to write an offer and not allow 3 days for the seller to respond to the offer. And so buyer writes an offer on the property and maybe gives, in the day where I got my license, we always presented our offers in person, first of all, but we would put on the contract upon presentation, which meant that if the seller didn't accept it, and I've had this conversation, I'm getting ready to walk out the door, and I said, the seller says, well, we haven't decided if we're going to accept your offer or not. And I said, well, the minute I walk out the door, you don't have the ability to create a contract between the buyer and the seller. And so that's a very powerful thing, right? So when the offeror, in this case, the buyer, makes an offer on a property, they give the seller the opportunity to create a contract between themselves and the buyer, and themselves and the seller. And so but how much time do you want to give them, especially if your buyer is chomping at the bit to go on to the next property if they're not going to get this one? And so, I think really honestly, I think fax machines ruined our business. People were, again, I was knocking on doors, presenting offers, in the presence of the seller's agent. But people were beating me by faxing offers over, and so agents were just in such a hurry to lock it up, tie it up, as they say. So that tended not to be a good result. So when I'm writing an offer for a buyer who wants to write multiple offers, I write one, send it over to the seller, giving the seller a half an hour to make a decision. And then if the seller doesn't accept it within that half an hour, now remember, to create the contract, the seller has to accept the offer as written. Okay. If the seller misses the time period, it just means that they cannot create a contract with the buyer unless the buyer ratifies it again later. Okay. Now, if the seller counters the offer, then that's a rejection of the offer at law. So there is no contract, and time periods don't matter at that point anyway. So again, I'm going to give the seller half an hour, and then we're going to write the second offer, giving that seller half an hour, write the third offer, give that seller half an hour. Invariably, one of the five calls me on the phone. Agents call me on the phone and say, the seller's going to counter your offer. Well, okay, go for it. Not knowing, of course, that the time for acceptance was over with. That's why that paragraph is so important on your purchase agreement. Okay. I remember when I was sending my class up, my RPA class up to the Department of Real Estate, for every hour of instruction. So I had 5 hours. For every hour, I had to write a 3-page paper about the subject matter during that hour. So I had 5 pages. So you would think, I'm sorry, 5 hours, 15 pages. I had 36 pages. So the Department of Real Estate called me on the phone, and then I love getting those phone calls. It says Department of Real Estate on the caller ID. And I'm going, yes. And so they say, we are so looking forward to reading your paper on the RPA. And I just thought that was a humbling moment. I really felt, very proud of that comment. So again, offer number 2, offer number 3, offer number 4, offer number 5. And the problem with the seller's agent is, of course, they don't know what I just told you. They don't know the concept a lot of times, but at the same time, they don't understand that they aren't in control anymore. The buyer has given the seller control, but only during that half-hour period of time. Does that make sense? I'm trying to help you, but also to help you understand from the seller's agent's perspective that you have to pay attention to that paragraph of the purchase agreement that shows how much time the seller has to make a decision. We get a little arrogant because we think this market that we're in right now is the only market there's ever going to be ever. Again, 40 plus years of doing this, and I've seen the cycles and the ups and the downs and all of that, and then this too shall pass. I know really good real estate agents that are always working on the market, that are already working on the market that's coming. So excuse me, be aware of that. Okay. What about contingent free offers? And so contingent free offers, so again, I'm on the expert witness committee forum rather at the California Association of Realtors. In fact, that's another one that I'm going to be chair of next year. I keep ending up, getting put in position to do all these things. Here's my non-contingent offer quick guide from the California Association of Realtors. So what do you need to know about writing a non-contingent offer? And so on the expert witness forum, we already have all these cases that we're dealing with where the buyer was convinced to write a non-contingent offer. They wrote the non-contingent offer. They bought the property. Non-contingent, by the way, on the inspection, the buyer's investigation of the property. You as the seller's agent don't ever want to get in front of the buyer's right by law to have an investigation done on the property. So I had a transaction where my buyer was a Navy SEAL, retired, super guy. He's buying a property. The seller's agent tells me we're only accepting non-contingent offers. I said, my guy's VA. He says, I don't care. They're going to have to remove all their contingencies. I said, well, you understand VA, they can't remove all their contingencies. The VA's not going to allow that to happen. He goes, I don't care. Okay. I contacted the buyer. The buyer says, no, I really want the house. I don't care. I'll remove all the contingencies. So SDAR, fortunately, had come out with a form already addressing non-contingent offers. So I had him sign that. I had him sign the contingency removal form, the CAR contingency removal form. That's my process. And we went forward, and yeah, we ultimately got the house. The first buyer that they accepted never showed up with the money. They just kind of disappeared. So which I'm not sure that they ever really existed, but okay. So not that I would, impugn the integrity of the seller's agent, but the buyer gets the house. So, Tuesday morning, I call the seller's agent and I say, we're doing our physical inspection on Thursday. Is that okay? 10 o'clock in the morning, all right? His response to me was, you don't have a physical inspection contingency. And I said, well, yeah, we do. He says, but you remove the contingency up front. They will remove the contingency, but we still have the right to do the investigation of the property, whether we're going to, get anything out of this or not. But the buyer, we don't want to interfere with the buyer's right to do the investigation. And so, folks, we're talking about risk management today, okay? And so, sure enough, he says, let me get right back to you. So, of course, he doesn't call me back. He sends me an email that says, fine, 10 o'clock Thursday morning's good. So I know he contacted his attorney, and his attorney probably told him what I just told you, which is don't ever interfere with the buyer's right by law to do an investigation of the property. The lawsuits we're seeing today. Oh, and by the way, the buyer submitted a request for repairs. The seller gave him $20,000 credit, all that, supposedly for I only want non-contingent offers. Apparently, the seller wasn't aware of the fact that he wanted only non-contingent offers. So, don't be shy about these things. But the lawsuits we're seeing now are the buyer closes the transaction, never has an investigation of the property, never does an inspection. And much like that lawsuit with the stem wall, the buyer in that situation said, I relied on the agent's obligation to do a visual inspection and the seller's obligation of disclosure as a substitute to my obligation to do a physical inspection of the property. Now, if you look at the bottom of page 1 of the Avid form, you will see the language right in there that says that those are not substitutes for the buyer's obligation to investigate the property. Okay, so there's your Avid, and I go into court, and then the attorney's got that in 10-inch letters up on the board for the jury to see. And I'm always feeling better when I know I'm working with a good attorney. So this is a really good Q&A on non-contingent offers. Should you do it, not do it? How enforceable are they? I really don't know. I just know that, if I have to get, the guy or the gal in the black robe to make a decision about something, I know it's going to cost people a lot of money. How does liquidated damages apply into it? Anyway, blah, 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 all those kinds of things. And the biggest thing, and this agent actually did a pretty good job, but the biggest thing that they didn't do is they didn't send over all the disclosures at the time of the offer. So regardless, the buyer had rights to rescind the contract based on statutory disclosures, as you can see up on the screen, within 5 days after delivery of the TDS, by deposit in the mail, or 3 days after delivery in person. So and that's on the bottom of page 3 of your TDS, has that very same explanation in there. Okay, so but what should the seller know about that? Because their agent's trying to convince them that don't let the buyer have any contingencies, and I just think that's an error. Okay, so that being said, let's go back over here, and that's my contingent free offer thing. So, and again, SDAR has a form as well that they came out with way before CAR did. So remember, number 3, that your job is to advise and counsel. So you review paperwork with your client, contractual forms, disclosures, warnings, preliminary title report. Remember the field case? You've heard me in my webinar that I've done a couple times now on how to read a preliminary title report. The field case had huge impact on us in the industry. It wasn't the outcome, the decision in the case. It was the dicta, the language that the judge wrote supporting that decision, which was very damning for us in the real estate industry. The buyer didn't even get the prelim until after close of escrow. And then that prelim indicated that the Otay Water District next door, with that great big water tank up on the hill, they could dump it at any point, which would also flood not only the property, but also the house itself, the residence itself. And so, how'd you like to read that after close of escrow? Okay, so your job is to review these things with your client. All right, and so, and when I say you, I mean you. I don't mean passing it off to the TC. I had a lawsuit where the agent's defense was, I would get the disclosures from the seller's agent, and then I would give it to the TC, and the TC would send it off to the buyers, and then I would just tell the buyers, call me if you have any questions. Well, that was a very expensive comment to make, and so obviously they weren't coached about how to talk in a deposition, but I would never say that, right? I mean, call me if you have any questions. That means you didn't go over it. When I look at the TDS, I get a TDS from the seller's agent, and I look at the TDS and I look at page 2, paragraph C, section 2, paragraph C in the middle of the page, and I see no all the way down the page. I teach that form. There's no way you can answer no to all those things. And so that just tells me that you didn't sit down and talk this through with the seller. And again, I've got cases like that right now. You just didn't spend any time with the seller to go over that stuff. And so I have that conversation with my buyer. I suspect that it's a problem because I don't know that the seller actually understood the importance of filling out the form. Is everybody good with that? Kind of an important concept. Okay. So number 4, let's talk about doing your own AVID. So your AVID is your agent's visual inspection disclosure. Okay. So it comes from Civil Code 2079. And again, be thorough within your field of expertise. Upload photos to the program. So when we go into, I know I opened it. Where are we at? Here we go. Assuming it hasn't timed me out yet. Oh God, more advertising. So let's go ahead. I'm going to open up a transaction. Let me just pull up. Let me pull up one from a while back. I'm just going to pull up one from a while back. I'm going to go to my documents over here. I want to show you a neat trick. It doesn't work in the template part of things, but it certainly works in this part of things. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to type in AVID. And where's my AVID? There is no AVID. What the heck is that all about? Where did it go here? There has to be an AVID. Wait a minute. Did I just see it? Help me out. Anybody here, if you see it, point it out to me, okay? I'm not seeing it there. And so if I'm not seeing it there, then I'm going to do it differently. Of course, this is also a lease, but let's pull up my AVID over here. I'm going to type in my AVID. Now, interestingly enough, there we go. It isn't in there yet. So the commissioner, the district manager for the Department of Real Estate, made a comment in a meeting that I was in with her, where she said, "Do your AVID. It's the only thing we ask you to do." And so let me show you the problems with the AVID. The AVID's a good form, okay? Shoot. No, didn't want to hit that. Do you want to see your changes? No, that means I don't have to pull it back up again. Hang on a second. Sorry. 12 years of college down the tubes. Okay, so we're going to go back down to the AVID. I'm going to pull it up. What I meant to do is get rid of that screen so you can see it better. So now, what they had in the old program, which they don't have anymore, was you had the ability to take pictures while you were inside of your AVID. So and I know we haven't included that anymore, text box highlight, we haven't included it, unfortunately, but it was a great feature of the program, was to be able to click the AVID and then just start taking pictures. I'm going to recommend to you that you still take pictures and that you attach them to your AVID. Remember, you have essentially unlimited storage space in this program. So, I want you to utilize that storage space. And so, the other thing that the district manager said was put everything in one place. So whenever you have a real estate transaction, put it all in the same place, right? And so that's what we do. We put everything inside of here. We don't have 15 different things. I had a broker that was getting audited, and I went in to help the broker, and they had been dealing with this client who was filing the lawsuit, and they had 5 different. The agent had the broker. She was a broker. Had 5 different email addresses, and so in a complete panic, how am I going to find all those emails? And it's not my problem. When the Department of Real Estate sends you a letter, they don't say whenever you can get around to it. They give you 2 weeks at the most. They give you 2 weeks, and so in this case, she was scrambling, having to find all those emails. I mean, there was a whole box that had to get shipped to the Department of Real Estate. But definitely upload your photos in there. Document everything. Number 5, be sure to have a signed written agreement with your client. And so how do we do that? And why do we do that? And so my key point is always,
when you define your duty, you limit your liability. And this is a saying, I know I made it up. I don't know anybody else that knows that, but when, you know, the two D's, two L's, that kind of thing. So when you define your duty, you limit your liability. And so your forms that you use in real estate, like on the seller side, you use the residential listing agreement. I think it's paragraph number 10. There's this whole paragraph about what you are going to do for the seller. Okay. And so you've got it in writing. The seller initials it, that they've received it, they understand what it is. And when you have something like that, it's really difficult for the seller later on to come back and say, you didn't contact the utility companies and make sure that I had turned the utilities off in my name. It doesn't say that anywhere in that form, that's what my job description is. So I am more than happy to do my job, but I'm also very careful not to go beyond my field of expertise, remember? So that's why I look at that listing agreement, I go, well, here's my duties, boom, 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 okay? Let's see, on the buyer side, we have the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. Now, I really like that form, by the way, you know, I really do. I've been teaching it for probably 20, 25 years now. Let me see if I can find a copy. I want to pull the, where's all my stuff? Here's my one-liners, as we call them. So where's my buyer representation agreement? Nuts. All right, so I don't see it at first blush here. But anyway, my buyer representation agreement, I was going to try to pull that up for you really quick. But my buyer representation agreement contains a paragraph in it that says the same thing that the listing agreement says. And remember, the buyer representation agreement is a listing agreement. The residential listing agreement that you're familiar with is when you are listing a seller as a client. The buyer representation agreement, you're listing the buyer as a client. And so you don't have a client until you have a written agreement. And so it makes sense when we say, with the seller, do you have a listing agreement? Well, no. Well, then you don't have a client. You have a customer. But the same holds true for the buyer side of things. Do you have a buyer representation agreement? No. Well, then you don't have a client. You have a customer. You have someone who is capable of becoming a client, but they're not a client until they sign a written agreement with you. And the reason why, and I'm not going to do the class on it right now, obviously, because that's something we're going to cover Tuesday, week after next. And that is, you know, how do I explain it? How do I get the client? I mean, we're always worried, how do I get them to sign it? Oh, God. Well, why don't you take a class on how to do it? And I assure you it'll be fine. Now, I've got to do all that in a 2-hour class, and 3 hours wasn't enough, but we'll cover it, take notes, watch the video several times, you know, that kind of thing. But on the buyer side, I get that buyer representation agreement. So one of the things that I make the lawyers do in my class is I have them write out the paragraph that defines the duty. So here's the duty that says, you know, agents, brokers' obligations in the buyer side of things. And so I make them write it out. Now, they're not allowed to copy paste. By the way, we have software now that we can tell if they copy pasted it. It's a plagiarism tool. It's really fascinating the way it works, but obviously, you know, it's the only place I use it is up there. But here's the thing. So the you know, we do all of our stuff in word wrap, right? So that it fits on the page, makes it nice and small. Well, my advice is to take that same paragraph, folks, and you should be thinking about this. Take that same paragraph and then do it in columns. So here's my first obligation. Here's my second obligation, my third, my fourth, my fifth. So I'm going to do them in a stack rather than word wrap. And so, you know, the attorneys would look at me in class and they would go, you know, it just seems like kind of a rote task. I mean, what's that all about? And so I encourage them to do it anyway. They come back later on, they say, wow, we had no idea what you do, and that you do a lot of stuff in a real estate transaction. The answer is yes, we do. And so that's why we're fairly heavily regulated, things like that. So when they come out and they do all that, I save it, right? Because, you know, they're students of mine, and I download them to my computer. And so guess what? When I first got started in real estate, I remember that I was with a company, and I remember that I was going door to door, knocking on doors, something that I really enjoy doing. And I was going on, I had this top 21 things I'm going to do for you. I won't tell you what company I was with, but top 21 things that I'm going to do for you. So, you know, if you look at that buyer representation agreement, same kind of stuff, hokey little, you know, excuse me, help you get qualified for a loan, help you find properties, counsel you as to the best properties to get. It's just 21 items that that were really important to the buyer, but I just kind of always took it for granted that I thought everybody did that, right? It's kind of like I was making as much money as I was when I first got in the business. I thought everybody was doing that. People would call me up, how are you doing so many deals? I was going to every educational opportunity I could find, and the transactions just found me. So here I was. I would put this on. Not only would I when I typed it all out, all that stuff out, I would go down to a company called Alpha Graphics, which I don't even know if they're in business anymore, but they were a printing company. And I would go down there and I would have them printed on goldenrod paper. And now you're really getting to understand who I was with. So goldenrod paper, and I had them, make it look like parchment paper. So it looked like the Dead Sea Scrolls. So here's the 21 things I'm going to do for you. I think you should do that. I think you should take that buyer representation agreement, write everything out, and then have it printed on paper that looks like it's something from the Ming Dynasty, right? Can you say Ming Dynasty? I don't know. Anyway, so something from way, way, way back before. Okay, so and you know what? It was one of my best closers. I mean, I would take that in there and I would sign it in front of them, and they would go, "Whoa, that is so impressive." But if they actually sat down and read it, which they never do, right? Sat down and read it, they go, "This is the hokeyest thing I ever saw," right? But that's what you're getting with your buyer representation agreement. So my advice to you is type all those things out and then print it, put a place for you to sign it on the bottom, and then hand it over to the buyer when you're doing your buyer consultation, right? Remember, we never meet the buyer at the house for the first time. We always meet them in the office or in a public place, right? For our own safety. And so I take that form and I sign it in front of them and I hand it to them. And they're like, ooh, ah. I mean, they're going to be signing a lot of stuff, right? So this is probably the last thing they're going to be looking at because there was nothing on there for them to sign. But it gives them an idea of what it is that we do. And again, I want to define what I do and I want to limit my liability. And so a very real case for me, which was very unfortunate. I sold a property. This goes back in the early 80s. God, that was 40 years ago. Oh my. Anyway, I sold a property, and of course I sell it to a guy who the buyer moves in across the street from my house, and he calls me up after closing, and he says, "You're a lousy real estate agent." Well, I was newer in my career, and only had a license for a couple of years. To this day, I've never had anybody ever say that, right? Because I take good care of people, I respond to their calls, I do things. Okay, so. But he says to me, he says, "You're a lousy agent." I go, "Why do you say that?" And he says, "Because you were supposed to call the utility company. Remember the utility company? You're supposed to call the utility company and turn the utilities over in my name and make sure that I did that." And I'm like, "They won't talk to me here, because it's privacy and all that kind of stuff. So they won't even talk to me." Well, he was from New York. He was buying a property where I was selling properties, but he was coming in from New York. And I guess in New York, that's the way they do things, is that they actually do contact the utility companies on behalf of the buyer or the seller and make sure that they get turned off, make sure that they get turned on, that kind of thing. And so clearly not something that they did where we were, but unfortunately he felt like I was a bad agent based on the customs in his locale. Okay. So that's why if I'd had the buyer representation agreement, there's nowhere in there that says I will check to make sure that you turn the utilities on in your name. Does that make sense? I want to make sure I dispel a lot of rumors, and that's why I like that form. Okay, so there is a strong movement to create legislation, and I mentioned that a minute ago. June Barlow, the attorney for CAR, said if we need to have a legislation passed, we can do it fairly quickly. So, and I think they should. I really do. And part of that again is the Burnett decision. I'm hands-free, right? Because when I do a real estate transaction, I have this conversation with the buyer up front. I'm going to get paid by the seller's agent. You as the buyer are going to agree to compensate me a certain amount, and the seller, I'm going to ask the seller to make up, to pay that part for you, so you don't have to pay it. But anyway. Class on Tuesday on the 28th. Okay. All right. Other states already require it by law. Use a checklist. Check with your broker, especially if you work with a broker who provides one. And that checklist can be your best thing going. And we have a checklist. It's several pages long. I'm not even sharing it with you because it's just too long. But I've got a checklist in my program too. So let me pull up. I'm going to pull up a closed program. That's just going to be. Oh, here we go. There's a closed program. I'm going to pull it up. Donald, certainly one of my best agents, and I'm going to pull up the. So here's all the documents, and everything. Here's a checklist. I like the checklist, and again, this is CAR's checklist. So when the offer comes in, when things happen, when you start putting in dates and stuff, it automatically puts them on your calendar. All right, so here you go. Contingency removal is supposed to happen on October the 10th. It has since closed, right? But I can look at it over here as a checklist. I can also look at it as a calendar. So when I pull up on a calendar, it's got all the closing date here, things like that already on the list. And so your broker probably has a checklist. You should talk to your broker and then create your own in the program that becomes a part of the program, so that you don't have to keep doing it again and again and again. Is everybody good with that? I like checklists, especially if you work with a broker that provides one. Number 6, again, I'm looking at the clock, so I want to make sure I get you out of here in time. We'll probably be a couple minutes early. But number 6, remember that you are the captain of the ship. And I have this conversation all the time. I'm going to have this conversation after this webinar with another brokerage. Do not rely on the TC, transaction coordinator, unless your broker instructs you to do so. So if you have an in-house transaction coordinator, that's one issue. You're probably in better shape than if you're working with a transaction coordinator who is outside of your office. And let's talk about that. So if it is an in-house TC, then you may have some protection. First of all, your broker gave you instructions to use them. Secondly, they're probably an employee of the company. And so there should be some coverage insurance-wise for their activities. But if it's a TC from outside of your brokerage, then we encounter some other problems. Okay, and so let's talk about that. So get approval in writing from your broker to use them. So get a hold of your broker and say, I want to use this person. Get something from your broker. I have an experience right now. We do transaction management, and the brokerage that we're handling a transaction for one of their agents, one of their broker associates, the company says, well, we haven't approved them as a TC, and which I think is smart. You need to get approval from the broker for the TC. And of course, then they saw, oh yeah, well, that's Kevin. Okay, so we'll approve Kevin. But get approval in writing from the broker to use them, right? Be sure that they have errors and omissions insurance. And so I had an interesting conversation with a transaction coordinator who said to me that you cost me a big account. And I said, what do you mean? And she says, well, you were doing a class one day and you made a comment that make sure that the TC has E&O insurance. And so I said, yeah. And she says, well, the brokerage asked me if I had it. I told them no, and they fired me. I wasn't able to do any more transactions for their firm. And I said, oh, well, why don't you have insurance? And she says, I can't afford it. And I said, what do you mean you can't afford it? You charge a lot of money for what you do. Well, I'm living day to day. Well, that's an expense problem more so than you're obviously very busy. But she was angry at me because she didn't have E&O coverage. And fairly decent TC, but coverage is not that expensive, and you can buy it per transaction, so it's not like it's that big a deal. But you want to make sure that they have coverage that indemnifies you, and that also indemnifies your brokerage. So that's for sure. Check with your broker first. Make sure it's okay to use someone before you start using them, before you start getting them all excited about the transaction, and then make sure that they have insurance coverage. I would get a copy of the policy. I do the same thing, by the way, with our physical inspectors. Whenever a physical inspector does the inspection, I want to get a copy of their insurance policy to make sure that we have coverage for them having a slip and fall on the property. Remember, because they become an invitee. They're not a guest, they're an invitee, and so they sue under a different theory of law. Okay, so let's take a look at number 7. So in number 7, we're going to document everything. I mean, everything. Okay. So I want to load into your transaction management platform, whatever that is. And again, we use a Zip Forms product. All of your emails, your telephone calls, your text messages, I don't text message. I just tell people I'm older and I don't know how to do it, which isn't true because I do. I text with family and friends, but I do not text with real estate agents. I do not text on a business level at all. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about that a little later. But I was on a panel back. I was president of San Diego back in 19. I was on a panel up there, sitting up there with Veronica Kilpatrick, the district manager for the Department of Real Estate. It's me, it's Veronica, it's Gov Hutchinson, it's Robert Sunderland, who is a big attorney at Crest Insurance, statewide insurance policy. And the four of us got up there and we were talking. And by the way, I have a tremendous amount of respect for everybody there. And every time Veronica says something, I write it down because you know what? She's inside. She knows, right? And so whenever I had 2 pages of notes. It was actually front to back on one paper. I was writing as fast as I could. Every time she says something, I'm writing it down. I'm sitting in front of 1,200 people writing down everything she says, right? I still have those notes, by the way. We all agreed on that panel, do not text message in a business relationship. And primarily because a number of reasons. One of them is the Department of Real Estate's not allowed to, get your text messages from you. That's just a little law we passed not long ago. But the other issue is that we don't have any backup. We don't have a copy of it anywhere. We don't have a backup copy of it anywhere. And interestingly enough, I had another lawsuit where the buyer's agent said to the attorney in the deposition that the attorney said, where are your text messages? And the buyer's agent said, I changed carriers. And so who was your carrier before? Well, it was this one. Okay. And then they subpoenaed the text messages, which meant now they had all of the text messages, not just the ones that I'm sure that the agent would have liked to have redacted from the group that he got. I actually went, again, I said a minute ago, I don't text message in business relationship. So, I was in a deposition. The attorney had blocked out 4 hours to grill me on my text messages. And so, of course, I didn't provide any because I don't have any. And so she says, where are your text messages? I said, I don't have any. She says, what do you mean you don't have any? I said, I don't text message with clients. She goes, you're kidding. I go, no, I don't. That's not what I do. Okay. Anyway, that was 4 hours. She was very upset about that. She spent actually 2 of those hours trying to recover from the fact that I kind of blew her day, that kind of thing. So I'd be very careful about that. Check with your broker again. Do you have a backup plan that saves your text messages? And so maintain, number 8, we're going to maintain good communications. All right. And so this is kind of important. So whenever I see something go bad, it's always because we stop talking to people. Right. And so we call it the cocktail attorney. Right. So you're going back and forth with your agent, and then all of a sudden something goes wrong. And then what happens? You don't hear from them anymore. And then you're at the cocktail party and you run into an attorney and you're telling the attorney about it. I had this happen actually in a really interesting situation that I was involved in where the other agent had the same thing happen. She stopped talking to her seller. She had told the seller that the law required that you have a wood destroying organism pest clearance. There is no such law. There's no such law that you even have to have an inspection done for wood destroying organisms. But she told the seller that they had to have it and that they had to pay for it. So seller paid $2,800 to have the work done. We never asked for it. I'm representing the buyer. We never asked for it. And so the seller, of course, whom she stopped talking to is at a cocktail party one day. And the attorney says, well, there's no law. The seller goes, well, she told me there was and made me pay $2,800. And so there's a lawsuit, right? So sure enough, I never even got brought into it because, I never asked for anything. There was no conversation that I said the law required it, none of that kind of stuff. She just took it on herself to know everything. And that was a problem for her. So maintain good communications with your clients. I had a lender that I worked with, probably did 95 loans a year with me because I don't do loans. She did all the loans. She would call me on the phone and she would say, here's what happened. And then here's what I did about it. Those are my favorite conversations, right? Because I don't do loans, so I don't know what your world looks like, right? I do sales. I help people buy and sell homes all the time. I got a good idea. I teach real estate finance at the college level, but But listen, if you ask me what interest rates were today, I'm not going to be able to tell you. I don't know what they are. So, but she would call me up on the phone. She would say, here's what happened. Here's what I did about it. So in other words, something happened that created a situation. I don't believe in problems. I believe in situations, right? They don't become problems when we do until we dwell on them. And so she fixed it. And so it's like, good. Those are all my conversations. I never had one that said, oh my God, what are we going to do? The sky is falling. I'm not going to get involved in all that. So maintain good communications with your client, because if you're doing that, then your client will appreciate you. And whether it's good news or bad news, just like her calling me up and saying, here's what happened, here's what I did about it. And I do that same thing today. Okay. All right. Be careful what you email. So I'm going to tell you, be very careful what you email, and you should email. I just consulted with a brokerage last night, and I can tell you that you need to keep a record of everything you're doing. And if you're having, and I like talking to people on the phone, right? Talking with people on the phone. And so, but I keep a record of the conversation, right? And so, but same thing when I'd rather have an email backup, and we'll talk about confirming letters in a minute, but email is forever. I had an attorney tell me that back in 1996. Said, be careful what you email, because email is forever. And I've never forgotten that. And so be careful what you email. I had a transaction, a lawsuit actually, where the two agents, they were on the same team. They did not like each other. And so they never talked with each other. I was in a room. They didn't even look at each other. They both played on their phones and stuff. One was the leader, team leader, and then the other one was the agent within the team and all that. Never spoke with each other, right? Everything they did was by email. And so, I always know when I'm having a lawsuit, because, I'm sitting out there and here comes FedEx with all these banker boxes full of stuff. And that was a good one. There's a lot of reading involved in that one. But I was able to convince the jury that they weren't dual agents, even though they were on the same team. So, so imagine that. But because the email that they wrote, all their emails, nothing in there said anything had anything to do with the plaintiff's case in the situation. Okay, so again, I'm defending the brokerage. All right, so do not text in a business relationship, and I told you I would talk about that. So I just think that it's I actually had one I forwarded on to the Department of Real Estate, where the agent said some things in text messages that they really shouldn't have said, but I guess they would have probably said the same thing in an email. I don't know, but I don't think you should be texting in a business relationship. So family and friends only. That's just the way that it's always going to be. So I mentioned this earlier. I said, be the source of the source, not the source. So you've got your client in the car. You're driving down Recuerdo and Del Mar, and all the houses are two-story houses, and you come across, there's this one house right in the middle of the whole thing. It's a single-story house. And so the client says to you, and it's the only one for sale on the block, right? And the client says to you, can I build a two-story house there? And so what's the answer? 858-755-9313. Well, Recuerdo is actually in the city of San Diego services, but that's the telephone number, because they said, what's that? That's telephone numbers for Del Mar City Planning and Zoning. And so, so I wanted to be the source of the source. So call the city of Del Mar Planning and Zoning and ask them if you can build a two-story house there. And sure enough, they did. And what did they find out? They found out that there was a deed restriction on that one house, that you could not build a second story on that one house. Now imagine you're looking up and down the street thinking all the houses there are two-story houses. Why can't you build a two-story house there? And the answer was because there was a restriction against doing that. It was a private deed restriction. The guy that owned the property behind it had owned this one at one point, and he put a restriction on the property that you could not build a two-story house because you'd block his view. So, he had that restriction on there. It happens all the time, folks. All right. And so, needless to say, don't assume anything, but give them the source of information where they can find the answer to their question. Okay. Everybody good with that? Any questions so far? I'm going to use that to get a drink of water. Okay. So moving right along. And I think I have a handful of stuff under this category. Be proactive in addressing complaints. So, not looking for problems, but when somebody asks you a question, you need to address it, okay? But be proactive about it. The worst thing you can possibly do, they call you on the phone. Yeah, interesting case in point. I remember I was in a meeting with Veronica, and she says, whenever we have an outreach to a brokerage. Now, when they say outreach, that means we're calling them up, or we're stopping by. They stop by your office for an educational discussion, right? That's what they call it. But whenever we have an outreach, 80% of the time, they never respond to us. And so I'm like, the Department of Real Estate is trying to get a hold of you, the broker, and you don't respond to them. I just think that's a huge mistake. If they ever were to call me, I'm going down there, right? I'm going to knock on the. In fact, I've done it. I've gone down there. I've knocked on the door. Somebody sent in a letter, said I was practicing, unauthorized practice of law, UPL it's called. And so I went down there. I knocked on the door. The guy came out. He was so shocked to see me, and I go, "How you doing?" And he goes, "Hi, how can I help you?" And I said, "You sent me this letter." And so, unauthorized practice of law. And he says, "Well, were you?" And I said, "No, everything I do, everything plastered all over everything I do. Here's my signature line in my email. Here's my PowerPoint presentations. Here's my presence on the internet. Soliciting me for business does not constitute legal advice. I don't give legal advice, not interested." And so he said, "Okay." And I said, "All right, what do we want to do?" He goes, "Will you just send me a letter?" I said, "Okay." I sent him a letter. It went away. Well, I asked him, I said, "Who filed the complaint?" He says, "Well, I can't tell you that." I go, "Really? You can't?" Okay, well, that's curious. Okay. Anyway, 2 weeks later, I get a letter from the Bar Association, same complaint. Is this fascinating? I mean, I'm like, what the heck? And so I called the Bar Association. I was in the middle of a conference, so I couldn't just get up and go to Sacramento. So I called the Bar Association and I said, "Hey, I got this letter." I called the person that sent the letter, and I said, "What's this all about?" And so she says, "Well, somebody filed a complaint, said you were, unauthorized practice of law." And I said, "Okay, all right. Who was it?" And they said, "Well, would you like us to send you a copy of the letter?" And I said, "Well, yeah." I mean, because I'm kind of thinking that it was the same person that filed the complaint at the Department of Real Estate. This is the only time I've ever had this happen. Okay, in 44 years, I'll take that record. It's a good one. So anyway, they sent me the letter. I'm looking at the letter and I'm going, "Wow, that is really wild." And then I look at the name of the person who sent the letter and I go, "Oh, I know that name." And so, sure enough, it was a lawsuit where I was defending the brokerage firm when I was the expert witness defending the brokerage firm, and this guy was the husband of the plaintiff. So I can tell you both of their names. I'm not going to do that, but she had a very bad deposition. And I had a very good deposition. And so he decided that he would intimidate me by sending a letter to me that, I'm sorry, he didn't send it to me. He sent it to the Department of Real Estate and to the Bar Association. Well, the Bar Association went after him for filing a false complaint, right? Because, and I said that same thing. They said, "Send us a letter." I said, "Okay." I sent him a letter. I said, "Here's all the evidence. Here's my signature line. Here's, all this stuff." And so, but they sent me a copy of the letter. I was just so surprised. So be proactive in addressing those things. I clearly wasn't going to go and go, "Oh, I hope they don't contact me again." Yeah, I'm not going to do that, right? I'm going to get right in there. We're going to have a talk, and I want to know what's going on because I want to make sure, I want to make sure I'm doing things the right way. And I think you do too. And that's why, you don't want to worry about this stuff, but you definitely want to address it head on. A broker for a very large firm in town does the same thing I do. And he gets letters and he's got a lot of agents, right? He's got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of agents. And so he says, "If I ever get a letter from the Department of Real Estate, I go down there and I knock on the door." I mean, they're so surprised to see you. Of course, they know him. And the good news is now, back when it happened to me, they were down on Front Street. And so now they've moved up to the Spectrum, right? Almost right across the street from SDAR. And so, when I'm, circling around there, I just like to go in and say, "Hey, how y'all doing?" There's chocolates, whatever, right? But you understand what I'm saying? Don't hide from these people. That's the worst thing that you can do. Remember what she said, 80% don't even respond to us. Well, that usually means then what they're going to do is they're going to dig in and then they're going to start chasing you. And so you don't want that. It's not a good thing. Okay. All right. So that being said, the number one complaint against realtors is they didn't return my call. Strangely enough, that happens to be the number one complaint against attorneys. They didn't return my call. I chase attorneys all the time trying to get a bill paid, right? They don't chase me, I chase them. So they didn't return my call. I think you need to stick your head in the mouth of the lion. All right. Now I say that, but I say that knowing that they're really, you need to address the issue. You're in a business that shy doesn't work. Okay. So I have this little graphic. I love this little graphic. Here come the lions, right? So you need to stick your head in the mouth of the lion. The one I'm afraid of here is the one on the left, not the one on the right. So the one on the left, that's the female. Yeah. Okay. I don't have to say anything else. Anyway, the one on the right, cuddly, big teddy bear, pet him, but the one on the left, that one's going to eat you. Okay. But stick your head in the mouth of the lion. I really think you should do that. So after checking in with your broker, So you need to check in with your broker before you respond to complaints and things like that. Clearly, if it's the Department of Real Estate, the broker got a copy of it too. Okay. All right. So again, I don't think that they should be feared. I think they should be respected. Okay. I did a podcast for the Department of Real Estate back a week ago Friday, and a neat man. He's the assistant commissioner. He's in charge of the marketing department for the Department of Real Estate, right? And so, an hour and a half, I sat there while he grilled me, and they're going to air it on November the 29th. But hour and a half, right? And when I got done, you know what he said? The mic is off, and he says to me, he says, "Wow, I didn't know that." Like, you're the assistant commissioner. I really like the guy. He's really good. He's very smart. But so sometimes again, I see things a little bit differently on the street than they're seeing, and so you got to have respect for what they do. And I had respect for him. He's a super guy. I've had really no negative encounters with the Department of Real Estate. I'm sure people do, but I always take it as an opportunity to learn something new, and you should as well. You'll learn new things. And again, if you have a system in place, and this is one of the most important things, if you have a system in place for doing things, then they will look at your system to see if it needs to get fixed. But if you don't have a system and then you do something, and without the system, they don't have anything to critique other than what you did. And so that's not going to go well. So you want to have a system in place for them to help you with it, right? I helped a broker on a review. Department of Real Estate came in. I met with the broker the day before, and I said, you have everything locked up in the filing cabinet? Yes. And I'm looking at the filing cabinet. The keys are in the lock. And I said, well, so first of all, get the keys out of the lock, because it's supposed to be at a locked filing cabinet, and the keys in the lock does not constitute a locked filing cabinet. So sure enough, they took that out of there. And a couple of other things I told them. The interview went really well. I call it an interview because that's what it was an interview. And I'll never forget her asking the question, the special investigator, they call them, asking the question, do you do property management? And the broker says no. And they said, well, we'll skip to page 6. It's like, okay, so property management, you're going to expect to get that visit, but it's not a bad thing. I mean, they're there to remember, educational session, that kind of thing. Okay. All right. So that being said, conversation log. I'm going to tell you something. 100% of the broker files that I review don't even have one. All right. So, and it's interesting because I was helping an agent the other day with a transaction, and she had one of their requirements is conversation log. And so she had done all of it. I mean, she had done such a great job on that. So let's take a look. I want to show you a neat trick. So over here where it says, I'm going to go back to documents here in the transaction. You see up here, this drop down arrow. I'm going to click that drop down arrow. And in this drop down arrow here, over here, it says email to transaction. I'm going to click on that really quick. It's going to give me an email address that is specific to this transaction. So I'm going to include this email address in every email that I send the client, whether I'm using Outlook or Gmail or Yahoo or whatever. I'm going to put this in the CC field, or I can put it in the BCC field. But every time I do that, it will automatically send a copy into their file. Okay. And so it's let me see here. So I could compose an email that's too complicated. Save as a contact. It'll pop up and say, what do you want to call it? Where do you want to put it? Okay. But over here on the left-hand side, it will actually create a folder that says email to transaction. And so if you make that a practice of doing that in all of your real estate transactions, all of your emails will be included there, and that's your communications log, right? So with that note, I want to talk about my confirming letters. So let's take a look. We've already talked about non-contingent offers, so I can get rid of some of these windows. I haven't talked about that yet. Whoops, commissioner's regulations. Yeah, I like reading those. Buyer interest letters, we talked about. We did not talk about that. I need to address that a little bit. Here's my agent's visual inspection disclosure form. By the way, page 3 of the agent's visual inspection, the district manager made that comment about you should be, it's the only thing we ask you to do. But on page 3, there's that box. And in that box, it says to be signed by the agent who performed the inspection, right? And so what I got out of the last meeting that I was in with them, they made the comment that, agents are doing the avid, but then they're taking it into the office and the team leader is signing it. And they said, we think that's fraud. And whenever the Department of Real Estate says we think that's fraud, my ears are up and I'm thinking, uh-oh, fraud. Okay, what's that going to be? Remember, that's the worst thing that can happen to you is fraud, right? It's the most difficult thing to prove. They're really good at proving it. It's a difficult and it's got the highest payout. So we think that's fraud. Why? Because you didn't do the avid. Somebody else did the avid. You signed the document that professed that you did the avid when in fact you didn't do it. Okay, so as an example, I did a transaction in Lake Forest. I sat down with a seller for 3.5 hours while I was taking the listing, had them fill out all the disclosures, statutory, etc. And in the meantime, another broker who was with our office, been with us for 15 years now, with our office, and he went around the property and did the avid. So I'm the seller's agent. I'm the agent that took the listing, but he was the one who did the avid. And so that was okay because we're both under the same brokerage, right? We're both under Linda. Linda's the broker. And so he did the avid, he signed the avid. I'm not signing that avid. I didn't do that avid, right? I didn't need to because we're all agents under Linda. So he did the avid, I did everything else, went through all the statutory disclosures, all of the contractual disclosures, all those things. Interestingly enough, when the offer came in, we sent all of the disclosures over to the buyer's agent. The buyer's agent said, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this. And this is something that I teach people. Again, this is risk avoidance here. Send over all of your disclosures at the time of the offer, right? Because if you send them all over at the time of the offer, then now the buyer doesn't have a 3-day right to rescind the contract based on what you sent to them. All right. And that's a very important concept. Okay. So, buyers looking for ways to wiggle out of transactions. Well, we sent everything. So you knew what you were buying. The courts say, you knew what you're buying. You signed off on it. So you can't come back later on and say, well, I want to get out of the transaction because, it's got purple walls or something. And so the buyer's comment was pretty interesting. The buyer's comment was, you've given me everything that you know about the property. I'm still going to do my investigation, and they should, right? But we don't need a 30-day escrow. We'll do a 13-day escrow. So literally, I'm buying a boat, I'm getting an RV, and all these things, all that because we did that closing within 13 days, not 30 days, right? They did their inspection, they went through the place. We had a death on the property, we had an unpermitted addition to the property. We had all these things. All these things that were negative about the property, but we disclosed everything and we sent it over at the time of the offer. Okay, everybody got that? So prior to the buyer committing to their offer, they sent us the offer, we sent them a counter and included all of these disclosures. And there's your advantages of the avid and all that. In the old days, agents would just write in the TDS, recommend physical inspection by licensed contractor. I remember I was in a case, it's probably been 20 years ago now, but the judge turned to me and said, why did the agent shirk their 2079 duty of inspection? Because all your duty is to inspect. Your duty is not to investigate. The buyer's duty is to investigate. The buyer has an obligation to go through the property and make sure that they satisfy themselves as to all the stuff. You don't have to write that anywhere. It's already written in all the contracts and all the forms and everything. Buyer has a right to do that. Don't interfere with that, right? Your obligation is only a reasonably competent, diligent visual inspection of the accessible areas of the property. And I know I'm talking with, there it is right there on your screen. Must conduct a reasonably competent, diligent, right? So, I know I'm talking to a real estate attorney when they quote that without even looking at it. They don't need to see it. They know what it says and they quote that. So material facts affecting the value, desirability of property, material facts that should have been discovered during the inspection. Okay. And again, remember what those lawsuits were I was telling you about earlier. They're coming back and they're saying, that the seller didn't tell us about this. The agent told us that we shouldn't do an investigation, have a non-contingent offer. And now when we bought the property, now we've discovered all these things that we didn't know about it. And so somebody's going to pay for that. And that's when we end up getting the lawyers and all that kind of stuff in place. Okay. All right. So very important concept. I'm seeing, so I promised you I would talk about the confirming letter. Okay. So I want to confirm my conversation. So when I'm speaking with it's usually the buyer that sues, right? So when I'm speaking with the buyer and I'm having a conversation, and in that conversation, we're talking about, this is what I think you should do. My job again, advise and counsel. And then the buyer says, "Man, I don't want to have a physical inspection done. I figure I'll just take it the way it is. They're not going to do anything anyway." They give me like 5 different reasons why they shouldn't have to do an investigation of the property, and most of them are centered around, why do I want to spend $350? And it's like $350, you're paying $5 million for a property. I want you spending 350. I want you to spend $10,000 to have it inspected, because it's the best money you're ever going to spend. But whenever they say they're going to do something that's inconsistent, and I always make the joke that I have a briefcase full of people that didn't follow what I told them to do, and that's fine because I've documented in writing, and here's my confirming letter. And again, Jackie Oliver wrote this, and I just think she's a brilliant attorney. I really love Jackie. She's barred in 4 states. She's a concert pianist, and she's just really, really good. And she writes letters. Her letters are, "Yeah, I told you not to buy the house, and if you buy the house, you're doing it against my advice." And I always get such a kick out of it, because it's like, "Why are you trying to talk them out of buying the house?" She says, "Because if they then go ahead and buy the house, there's nothing from me anywhere that says that I said it was okay to buy the house. I told them don't buy the house." So that's her thing, and we're her way of handling everything. In fact, I'm going to give her a call because I want to wish her a happy Thanksgiving. She's just a great lady. But she wrote this. This is great. All right. So change the following. So she even gives you an instruction sheet on how to complete the form. And I'm going to show you the form. Does the client have to sign it? No, but you need to get it to them in the manner in which that you've been getting things to them in the past, right? So if you're and Jackie made the comment that certified mail is replacing, or I'm sorry, email is replacing certified mail as a way to deliver things to people. And so, but I always want a response. So, here she says, the following non-inclusive examples. In other words, there's more than this, including but not limited to boundaries, fences, easements. I can tell you that I've had so many lawsuits over property boundaries. The agent says, "Well, if it's right up there where the fence is," it's like, the people who put the fences in are not surveyors. They do not know where the property boundaries are, but you making the assertion, and it's never right. It's like Carmel Valley, across the freeway from where I live. Carmel Valley has a whole bunch of properties over there that have, that are not online. They're 6 feet, 9 feet off, because the people that are putting the fences in don't know, right? They're just putting a fence in. We always think, well, it's got to be a certain distance from the house. No, they don't know that. Most times they're putting the fence in after the house is done. They don't know that there are setbacks. They don't know what those things are. And so physical inspection. I had a lawsuit on the fence. I should tell you that. So the buyer's agent, an exceptional broker, the buyer and the buyer's agent and the seller's agent are at the property, and there's a house, and the buyer says, "How far back does the property go?" And the seller's agent says it goes all the way back to the fence. And so it's a pretty good sized portion of property. Well, and it turns out the seller's agent lived next door, right? So you think they would have known better. And so the transaction closes. All of a sudden somebody's building a fence, in the backyard of this party's house. And so they're like, "What are you doing?" "Well, we own this property, and we're not the only one. We own this one, and then there's another one before we get to the fence." So there's like 3 properties. And so obviously underrepresented in a very large way about the size of the lot. By the way, also same scenario in the Field case, where the agent represented that the lot was larger than it really was, that the Otay Water District's easement on the property was less than it was, just all kinds of bad things that nobody verified, nobody did any of that kind of stuff. And so here we are in this situation. There's a fence going off, and it's cutting a third off of what the buyer thought their property was. They thought their property went all the way back to the fence line, and it did not. There were 2 other properties before he got there. So needless to say, everybody's lawyering up, and there we go. Physical inspection reports. So, interestingly enough, I always say, whenever you do a physical inspection, the inspector goes left, you go right. You never follow the inspector. The inspector's report is completely independent of you. Your obligation is much, much lower than the inspector's report is. The inspector's obligation is actually to investigate for the buyer. They're doing the investigation on behalf of the buyer. Your job is not that deep. Your job is just to do a reasonably competent, diligent visual inspection. But I know agents all the time, they follow the inspector around because the inspector is going to tell them about stuff that they might have missed. No. It has to be stuff that within your purview. So I've seen it happen. We had a really good lawsuit probably 30 years ago, 25 years ago now, where the agent did a good job. They were, in the property, they were doing their wasn't an avid, we didn't have the avid form, but they wrote on their notes, they put in there that the water stain noted in northeast corner of bedroom number 2. Well, everybody signs off on it. We're all done. Transaction closes. Buyer goes up into the attic to fix the source of the water leak, only to find out it's not water, it's paint cans. So paint, of course, is a hazardous material in California. And so now everybody, again, it cost the brokerage, I think it cost the brokerage $250,000 to get out of the lawsuit. That was an expensive comment for somebody to make. So, and they did it in writing. So how would we have done that differently? So water stain noted in northeast corner of bedroom number 2. Don't use the word water. So remember, our job is, and we'll talk about this in a second, but our job is to disclose, not diagnose. It's not your job to tell people how to fix it. It's not your job to tell people how it got there in the first place. That's not your job. So disclosures, et cetera, new facts, tax or legal inquiries, zoning, future use. So the receipt for reports is not enough notice. No, absolutely not. And here's a sample of what the letter looks like. So here's the date. Obviously, this is 2015, still relevant today. She sends them by mail and fax, at least she did back then. This is the confirming letter that's on the San Diego's Association's Risk Management Committee. It's not the one that CAR has, a little bit of a different one. I'll show you that in a minute. But property address here, dear buyer, seller, whoever you are, nice speaking with you today. In that conversation, we talked about this. I told you to do this other thing. You've indicated to me that you're not going to do that or whatever. I'm not going to have an inspection done or whatever. And so it's completely contrary to what I suggested that you do. And so on that note, now we have in the file, we've got, I'm in his file. Let me see here. Is it on this page? Maybe not. Nope, not on that page. Let me go to my template. So I'm going to pull up my templates. Oh, it's angry with me. It's probably getting ready to sign out. So hang on a second here. Going back up to the top. Oh God, I hate when it does this. Okay, so let me see if I can get us back into this thing again. It does this sometimes, right? So I'm gonna go back into my transaction center, click on zip forms, click on access zip forms. See, that's the problem, is it logs you out because it doesn't realize, there's a time on the program, but unfortunately it's never enough for me. So we're going to log back into the program again, and I'm going to take us up to the templates up here. So we actually have a template up here. We do everything in our office. We do everything by template. So I'm going to grab the buyer offer template, and I'm going to look for my over here on the left. This is what our template looks like, and here's the conversation log that I told you I've never seen in a broker's file. I'm going to click on that, and within that there's a confirmation of conversation form, and this is a form that the California Association of Realtors created that kind of mirrors the one I just showed you. So letter specific instructions, warning regarding agreements between licensees to pay commissions. You have to be careful about that. And so, like we often fear buyers and sellers getting together. We before the transaction closes, we fear that more when we're not there. And that's probably good advice. They get together and they have a conversation among themselves, the buyer and the seller, and then they agree to do certain things. and it's not in writing. And so you see right down here, warning to agents and brokers regarding agreements on behalf of the principals. So all of the purchase agreements require the purchase agreement itself or any modification, all that stuff to be in writing, signed by both parties. Therefore, incumbent on a broker or agent to recognize that any agreement between themselves on behalf of the buyer and seller to modify an agreement is not binding unless signed by both the buyer and the seller. So of course, buyer and seller make a deal among themselves, and then they don't even tell you. Well, that's going to be a weak defense, because this is one of the reasons why we try not to let them get together independent of us. And so here's the letter, and it says, here's what, and this is on the buyer side. So here's here are the recitals, and then down here, I'm writing to you to confirm our earlier conversation. Mine says that if any of the above does not comport to your understanding of our conversation, I use the word comport, and then they got to go look it up. Your understanding of our conversation, please notify me immediately. Because when you're going to get served 2 years and 9 months from now, and so. I spoke with you. I'm documenting when. At that time, I told you to do this. You acknowledged receipt of these things, and then you decided to do things your own way. So, I think it's a pretty good letter. I like it. I like Jackie's better, but that's just me. I like Jackie. She writes really good stuff. But they have one. So we have this for the buyer side, and we're in the buyer template here. But they've also written them on the seller side of things. And so again, I'll send you my template if you want it. But the way to get it is you go up here where it says all forms, and then you click on where it says CAR. You go down to sample letters, and then there's acting against the advice of the buyer, acting against the broker's advice on the seller side. Here's my confirmation of conversation form. So, we put all these things in here. And I think the sad part about it is we don't tell you where it is. Like, you would never have known to click the drop down to sample forms. And I think that's just a very, very important thing that we need to make sure that we do. Okay. So that's the conversation about that. I'm watching my clock here to make sure we're still good. Let's go back to maintaining good communication. So I just don't see them in files. I mean, we used to require them when I was management with the Rock people. We always required the conversation log. In fact, on the inside, we always carried things around in folders. Remember the yellow folders, legal size paper, 8.5 by 14, 8.5 by 11. So, we always stapled it to the inside cover so that when we're driving down the road, we could write our notes down. I found a file in the garage the other day, very first house. In fact, I think I still have it. It's around here somewhere. Very first house I ever bought. There were probably like 6 pieces of paper in this folder, in a folder, no less, right? So I was holding on to the last record of a house that I bought on a standard form back in 1979. And so I don't know if I threw it away. I might have, because this stuff, I've been carrying this stuff around for years, decades, in fact. But I wanted to make sure that I understood that that's how we did things then. Today is a whole new day. Okay, so make certain that key transaction decisions belong to your client. That little asterisk means I've got something to share with you in a form that I might not have pulled up. Well, a confirming letter, of course, right? And then I have some other things to show you. I've got my buyer interest letters. I didn't get a chance to cover that. I want to come back to that in a minute. And then the TDS section 1. We'll talk about that. But a couple of things I have up here. So, for example, the commissioner's regulations. Okay, so it's just not that tough, folks. It's it starts at page 185. It's included in it's title number 10, chapter 6, real estate commissioner. Here's the general provisions. Here's all this stuff. When they created your exam, and you all remember, you got your real estate license, you had to take a state exam to get it, right? You had to qualify. It was a qualifying exam. Okay, so what that translates to is you had to get a certain score. If you were taking the salesperson, you had to get a 70. If you were taking the brokers, you had to get a 75. So it was a qualifying exam. Shelley Wilson, who is the gal that created the exam that's currently being used, wonderful gal, still works at the commissioner with the Department of Real Estate, 30 years later. And she said, I just went through from the top. They said, come up with 1,000 questions. And so she said, I just started at the top and said, what does DRE stand for? All that kind of stuff. So the majority of the questions on the state exam for both the agent and the broker came from the glossary, so I always tell people, read the glossary, make sure you got that down. I know that they're coming up with a new exam. I know I had been teaching the crash course to pass it, and so I was precluded from being on the committee because I thought I had been teaching it within the year, when in fact it had been a couple of years since I taught it. Can you imagine me creating, helping create the state exam? That would be kind of a funny thing. So anyway, because I'm going to put questions in there that are going to be relative to our industry rather than just definitions from the 1900s. So that being said, those are the commissioner's regulations. Again, I will send all this to you if you want. Just send me an email asking for it. Then I also have the Business and Professions Code, which the commissioner's office looks at their regulations. They look at the B&P code, and then they look at the real estate laws. And we'll talk about that in just a second as well. But B&P code, it's not incredibly long. It's got a lot of good stuff in it. In fact, the best way to find it is to go here to common enforcement violations. And so probably the most common thing that happens is the trust fund record keeping violations, people not keeping records of things. And so this is mostly going to happen in property management. When this was all written, brokers had trust funds and trust accounts and trust logs. And so most of them pretty much gotten rid of it unless they're doing property management. And so they'll have it for those situations. But most of this is as you can see, trust funds received, separate record for each beneficiary. These are the regulations. These are again the code 10145. That's B&P code. Says what you're supposed to do, and then I'll find the corresponding part of that when I look at the commissioner's regulations. Okay. I get down here, I see it talks about all this stuff. I mean, it's really good stuff. Trust fund shortage violations. They know there's $6 million missing in trust funds. That's why they are always, being very careful to regulate those people that have a trust account. In fact, we even went to Wayne Bell a couple of years back, and we said, we can't open up a trust account. And he said, why not? And we said, because we're not a trust. And so even the brokerage, so he went down to try to. We told him, go down, try to open up a trust account. He goes down there, and they said, you're not a trust. You don't have a trust documents, trust certifications, nothing. So they called it a trust, but it isn't a trust. It's a separate account for the money of others. So what, so you want to make sure that you keep your money separate from your client's money. If you just keep that principle in your head, you'll be okay. Keep them separate. They're not to be intertwined. If you put your money in with the money of others, then that is called commingling. And once you do that, any money you spend out of that account becomes conversion. And the reason, and so now you have two crimes, and they're both crimes. So no E&O coverage, right? That kind of thing. But commingling is putting your money in with the money of others. Conversion is spending somebody else's money on your stuff. And so the problem is, so the DRE will allow you to put $200 of your own money into that account, to cover bank charges and things like that. The problem is that if you put in $300 of your own money, and then you go to cut a check to pay your gardener out of your account, then we don't know if that, well, obviously in that case, you only had 100 or 200 in there. So 100 of that means it belongs to somebody else. So you just converted that money. So commingling, putting the money in, conversion, taking the money out, and without the authority to do that. Okay. So therein lies the problem, and it's a serious problem. I pulled up on the board here, failure to supervise violations, probably the most common thing that the Department of Real Estate looks at. On the part of the brokers, a recurring problem. Department has to address the problem real estate brokers becoming designated officers of corporations owned by salespersons or unlicensed individuals, and then not properly supervising the operations. And so they're telling you what it is that they're looking for. I would recommend that you read it. So while it's not illegal for brokers to become designated officers of corporations that they don't own, they must remain. Remember, there has to be a broker in order to be able to operate a real estate corporation. It has to have at least one broker as an officer. By the way, the DRE will not give a broker's license to an LLC, because by nature, they don't want you limiting your liability. Okay, so they must be mindful of their duty to supervise licensed activities of the corporation. So all too often, real estate brokers do not take that responsibility seriously, and the public suffers as a result. So what's the remedy? They even tell you how to fix it. Just understand your responsibility, go through all that kind of stuff. And then we have our unlicensed activity violations. People doing things, like your assistant doing licensed activity, your assistant talking to people calling in on the phone, your unlicensed assistant talking to people on the phone, giving them information about the property. Remember that the DRE considers that activities that requires a license. And so, interestingly enough, unlawful employment or payment to an unlicensed individual. So you're paying your transaction coordinator or to a salesperson who's not employed by the broker. And so, we have that happen where, in fact, I just stopped a broker from doing what they were about to do, which was have the payment going directly to the cooperating broker the from the owner of the property. And so, it's like, no, we need to make sure that you get the money and then you can pay it to another broker only. You may not pay compensation to a salesperson of another firm directly. You may only pay it to a broker. Okay. All right. So that's all that. And then here's the remedy. And then misrepresentation violations. Remember, misrepresentation, very, very common. So we have negligent misrepresentation, which is you represented something that you did not know if it was true or not. Turns out it wasn't, but you weren't really doing anything to harm anybody, but it's still negligent misrepresentation. Okay. Again, by the way, folks, a crime, so no E&O coverage. Okay. But then there's an intentional misrepresentation, which is going to get about as close as you're going to get to fraud, right? Because you intended to deceive someone, usually for your own benefit, and they really don't like that. So you want to be careful not to do those things. How about a criminal conviction violation? You get convicted of a crime and then you go to renew your license and you just forget to put it on there. I had someone contact me who said my license application got denied, and they weren't applying with us. We wouldn't have taken them, but license application got denied. And I go, really? Why is that? And they said, well, the Department of Real Estate said that I was convicted of a crime. And I said, well, were you? And they said, no. And I said, there's no way that they would have said that you were convicted of a crime if you weren't convicted of a crime. And so then the lie really started to go. And so the story was, police pulled myself and my boyfriend over, one evening, and we've been drinking and all that. And the boyfriend, apparently something happened in the course of the interaction with law enforcement, where the boyfriend is removed from the vehicle, and apparently the passenger, which was her, was removed from the vehicle as well. Doesn't remember any of this, of course. And I said, well, okay, I get that, but you had to remember that they put you in a room that had bars around it. No, I don't remember that. Then you don't remember because you got a 24-hour cooling off period, right? So that now you're supposedly sober. Now you're standing in front of a judge. You don't remember that either. No, I don't remember that. You don't remember them convicting you, because that's what you're there for, is to defend yourself for a crime. Apparently, probably assaulting a police officer, or a lot of times they'll get written up for disorderly conduct, or drunk in public, things like that. She says, I wasn't even driving the car. And I said, it doesn't matter. I mean, you can be doing a lot of stuff that can still get you in trouble. And so again, continued to defend with me. And so I turned her over to an attorney. I said, it's just not something I'm going to be able to help you with, especially since I know you're lying to me. You had to know you're wearing bracelets, right, at some point. So anyway, individuals are very often either denied a license or disciplined for failing to disclose a criminal conviction on an application, or for being convicted of a substantially related criminal offense. Now, the sad truth of it is, I'm hearing of people that were convicted of things and that they had their licenses revoked, but now they're able to get that license back again. And so I'm not really clear on that, but that's I think it has to do with kind of trying to give people a second chance. That's just the way it is in California. So I kind of think that erodes the system a little bit, but that's just my personal feeling. But it is what it is. Okay, so the one remedy that should be discussed in connection with criminal convictions, that persons applying for a license should take great care to disclose all past criminal convictions. They're very clear on it, about it on the application and on the renewal application as well. If it is not disclosed, the chances of you getting a license, they say, will be diminished as a result of their non-disclosure. And so, it's just not the way to go, folks. You got to tell them everything. Tell them everything. Fess up. Get it over with. And do your time, so to speak. So. That being said, so we didn't talk about the laws. So here's the laws and regulations, disciplinary action key. And so again, you can find this on the DRE website, but here's B&P code. So they give you a list. And when I teach the rules of the MLS, I do the same thing. I give you the list, right? They have to tell you what they're going to ding you for. So here it is: performance of an act which would have been grounds for disciplinary action. That's B&P code 480 A3, 490, substantially related criminal conviction, 10130, acting without a license. So you're at the open house. The broker hires you to talk to people at the open house, and you're carrying on like as if you're a licensee, and in fact you're not. And so all these things, just not good. Making false promise, any substantial misrepresentation, very common. Commingling trust funds with the broker's funds, things like that. I remember being at a meeting, and I remember the commissioner making the comment that this broker sent in their license renewal, and the check bounced. So I just kind of always thought that if you're going to bounce a check, probably best not to bounce it to the Department of Real Estate. And so this is not a license renewal. And so they looked at the check, and it was written on the broker's trust account. Well, now you got to know that that's not a good thing. And then clearly it's getting worse, right? You wrote a check on the trust account. They might have missed it, but then it bounced. And so now for sure they see it. And I remember the commissioner saying, we didn't even bother calling them. We just sent 4 guys down there, and let's see the books. And so the broker breaks out the books, for what they were worth. And the investigating officers said, you're paying your gardener, you're paying your electrician, you're paying all your own personal bills out of here. What happens when, you run low on money? And he says, well, I just put more of my money back in there again. So clearly the $200 limit didn't apply to this person. Anyway, the commissioner's comment was, we took the license. I mean, that was it. We're done. Notice 10177E, and 10177E says that you use the word realtor or any kind of trade name of which you're not a member. They can take your license. They can keep you from getting a license. There is all kinds of stuff that they can do. So it really goes to falsehood, right? It really goes to not telling the truth. And so if you call yourself a realtor when in fact you're just a licensee, remember we have 400,000 roughly real estate agents in the state of California, but only about 185,000 of them are realtors. So that 115,000 need to be very careful that they don't call themselves a realtor or let people believe that they're a realtor when in fact they may not be a realtor. And that doesn't mean they don't have a license. It just means they're not a realtor, not a subscriber to NAR's code of ethics. Okay. All right. So other stuff in here, and then I get down to the commissioner's regulations, licensee's failure to maintain current business or mailing address with the Department of Real Estate. I know that our office changed our previous location. They closed the doors. It was executive sharing, and they closed the doors. So we were in a scramble trying to change, our address. We kept sending things in. They weren't responding. This went on for months. Finally, we got somebody to take care of it. And so we finally got our address updated. This is years ago now, but, Linda gets into a scramble when that happens. And so unauthorized use of a fictitious business name. So I've had brokers that I've supported that their name is not on the DRE website yet. And so I tell them, do not use the name until it shows up on the website or until you get a letter from the Department of Real Estate, a corrective action or whatever that says what you've got to do to make that happen. And so very, very important. Don't call yourself something unless you've got approval to do that. 2726, failure to have broker salesperson agreements. The law requires that the broker have a written agreement with the agent. And so a lot of times I don't see them. And so signed by both. And why? So even though it says commissioner. The commissioner is not going to hear complaints about commissions, and so that's why it has to be addressed in the actual agreement between the broker and the associate. Okay, so that's good. So we got to move forward here. Confirming letters, we've already talked about that. Jackie says certified mail on key decisions. Emails may be okay if you get a written response. Mine are always, notify me right away. San Diego has some really good risk management forms. You should get really good with those. Those are also in your library, by the way. So when you pull up your forms and you go over here to where it says all forms, and I click on the drop down, and there's San Diego risk management forms, and here they are. I use these forms in pretty much every transaction that I do in San Diego County is going to have those forms in it. Okay, all right. Let me see here. What else? The three most important words in real estate. I know everybody tells you it's location, location, location. I'm going to tell you that's not correct, at least not in our world, right? So it's going to be disclose, 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 right? So again, as I said, disclose, don't diagnose. I don't want you diagnosing things. Just tell them what you see. Stain noted, not black stain noted, not mold, not stachybotrys, not you don't know the difference between mold and mildew, so you don't want to be diagnosing these things. Okay, that being said, and I got a bunch of those little things. Remember, statutory disclosure contains a rescission right, which means put the parties back in the position they were in prior to contract, which, there goes the deposit, right? Contractual disclosures contain cancellation rights, something we can argue about, that kind of thing. Okay, you got to know the difference, and I do a whole 2-hour thing on that. So that being said, as a general rule, send and receive everything from within your transaction management software. That's what we do. We send things in and out of there all the time. And then I showed you a little bit earlier how to actually tag it so that it would automatically get loaded up into your program. That includes, not limited to, emails, telephone calls, text messages. Do not use buyer interest letters. And again, I have that for you if you're interested and you want the information on the buyer interest letters and why they are not a good idea. I do set policy for a couple of brokerages out there in town, and one of those is we do not do love letters, otherwise known as buyer interest letters. So there you go, aka love letters. Removing contingency at the time of the offer, lots of lawsuits from that. Have your clients sign off on CAR's legal Q&As, non-contingent offers, buyer interest letters. SDAR has non-contingent offer advisories. Again, certainly a standard of practice in our area. And it took CAR a while to create their own, but they did, and they did a pretty good job on that. So that was our talk, top 10 risk avoidance techniques. Just want to show you a couple things. So here's the QR code if you want to have be able to look at the webinars that we've already created so you can see them. You can also type into your browser at Burke Real Estate Consultants Inc. There's also a bit.ly link, real-estate-ed. Those all go to our location. I had to create all these because the Department of Real Estate said that when I'm teaching my approved classes, that that I got to give everybody the general information page and a way to find it, and that's where you're going to find it. So please remember to like and subscribe. Like because it just makes me feel good, but subscribe so that you can be brought up to date on the changes, the forms, the different things that I put up there that are different than they were before. Stay tuned for podcasts. 29th of November, that'll be 2 weeks from now. It'll be Wednesday, 2 weeks from now. I was a guest speaker, legal documentation in a real estate transaction. Again, easy to find it on their website. You just go to dre.ca.gov. There's a great big link on the site that has their, let me see if I can get it for you really quick. I'm on the DRE website all the time. I really do spend a lot of time there. So here it is, consumers, and then go down to First Home California. And then here's all the stuff that they've got going on there, right? Signs of potential fraud. Got lots of really good stuff in there. Anyway, so that'll be on the 29th. Majority of complaints filed with the Department of Real Estate are from first-time home buyers. And I said this to the assistant commissioner. I said, it's really sad for me because that means we're not taking the time to explain it to the people that are really the foundation of our entire economy. The first-time home buyer, the entry-level housing, that has to happen, folks, because if it doesn't happen, we don't have move-up housing. And so, people are spending more and more money for entry-level housing now than they did a while back. So I want to make sure we got those people taken care of. The BRBC, I'm going to be doing podcasts on it, so be aware of that. If you have anything else you want to see, education at SDAR, copy me or send it to me, copy them, and we'll see if we can get it out there in front of you. And then I do a weekly email update that you go to kevin@burkerealestateconsultants.com, send me an email. I'll send you, we don't put anybody on it unless they request to be on it. So it's an opt-in only. So I just want to let you know about that. So that's kind of where we are today. Are there any other questions? Anything else that I need to address? We had quite a few people on here at one point. So if there aren't any other questions, I want to thank you for being here today. I very much appreciate the value of your time. I will be back in 2 hours to do the changes to the RPA. And as we say from my hometown of Del Mar, I look forward to seeing you around the track. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye for now.